Hello everyone and welcome back to, the only second video of the Left at Z channel. Today's video is a little bit more controversial, I think. It is about the misconceptions of the USSR. I believe that the American perception of the USSR is very unfairly negative. To give a little bit of background, I'll go into more history later, but it was the world's first socialist country, and it lasted from 1922 all the way up until it was dissolved in 1991. It faced a lot of opposition and was at the center of the infamous Cold War. The country's eventual dissolution has been diagnosed by much of the capitalist world as failures of communism, or the shortcomings of socialism. My thesis is that the Soviet Union successfully increased the quality of life for its people and had economic growth because of the advantages of socialism, and all of this was in spite of foreign interference. The Union has been unfairly compared to more developed nations, all in an attempt to discredit Marxist theory. Now, let me be clear, the goal of this video isn't to defend everything that the Soviet Union did. I just want to point out how skewed the perception of the Soviet Union is, especially from the US and the West in general. First off, a little bit of history, like I said we would get into. The Union of Socialist Soviet Republics, or better known as the USSR or the Soviet Union, was founded after many worker revolutions in the early 1900s. This was mainly led by the Bolshevik Party and Vladimir Lenin, mainly in Russia. Russia and several bordering states decided to become one union with the goal of establishing the first ever country based off of Marxist theory. The union would go on to be a successful nation until it was gradually dissolved in 1991 due to various complex reasons that I won't go into today. For most, this rise and fall of socialism is evidence for the shortcomings of socialism. In reality, the history of the Soviet states is very complex and full of both successes and failures. Before the Soviet Union, countries like Russia were agricultural and industrial economies, still ruled by a czar and/or oligarchs in a sort of feudal style of economy. Workers were poorly paid, poorly educated, overworked, poorly housed, and just generally lived in a low standard of living. Many people in those countries compared their lives to Europeans at the time that had transitioned to capitalism, and the eventual unrest led to many revolutions and eventually the union itself. And then that union, through socialism, ended up becoming a major industrial power. Despite an economic depression at the time, the USSR grew rapidly and eventually were even able to support global military efforts across the world. And they became the first country to ever launch an object into orbit. To this day, historical economists are impressed with the rapid growth of the Union, as well as its stability. What the Soviets were able to accomplish in such a short time is actually very impressive. The quality of life in the country drastically improved in the first few years. If we were to actually compare it to capitalist countries at the same time and at the same level of economic development, you can see that the quality of life statistics are better than those capitalist countries. If you take a look at these statistics specifically, you can see that socialist countries outperform capitalist countries consistently at the same level of economic development, that is. And you can see that in almost every aspect of quality of life, socialist countries outperform the capitalist counterparts. The Soviet Union would fall under the upper middle income category, which you can compare to countries like Brazil, Mexico, Iran, Italy, and quite a few other ones of that similar sort of economic development. The standard of living in the socialist countries were comparable and sometimes even better than high-income countries such as the US. This data here just completely contradicts any sort of idea that the Soviet people were starving, at least as a consequence of the socialist economy. If you want to take a look at this study a little bit more, it's actually very interesting. I highly recommend this video by the creator Hakim, who goes over this comparison extensively in this video, which will also be in the description. I also want to make the argument that people were just generally happier in the Union. Surveys show that many Russians believe that the Soviet Union was the greatest era for its people, and similar surveys find similar sentiments across the Soviet states. Now, this is a little bit more of an anecdotal point, but in this video, the creator interviews people that lived during the Soviet era, and a lot of them pointed out how people just seem to be more polite, more kind, and more united as a country. These videos aren't necessarily like hard evidence that socialism is better, but I still think that it supports my point and gives a little bit more of a personal side to this argument as well. I definitely recommend checking out this video as well. Another issue that I have with the perception of the USSR is how it's always compared to the United States. See, the United States has been overall a booming economy and a very successful economy ever since its inception in 1776. However, the USSR, it was founded in 1922 and had to completely overhaul the existing government and rework the economy to reflect its socialist goals. Even if you are to compare socialism and capitalism, you can see that during the Great Depression, people's lives were greatly improving under socialism, while the Great Depression devastated many lives in especially the United States. Socialism proved to be much more stable and provide better lives for its people, yet we are led to believe this idea that the people in the Soviet states were starving and generally had a poor standard of living. Socialist countries consistently met the required food averages for a healthy economy, even in places where capitalism failed to. The quality of life statistics that I showed earlier don't compare specific countries, unfortunately. However, it definitely favors and looks better for the country that inspired and started the socialism trend versus the country that fervently defends capitalism. The US also pushed this idea that the USSR was somehow a global superpower. This is despite the fact that in the 80s even, the Soviet economy was still about half the size of the American economy. Things get more speculative as you try to conclude why people try to explain a mid-development nation with the most powerful country in the world at the time, but I believe that it was to defame socialism in the interest of preserving capitalism. Another point that is very important to consider is how all of the prosperity felt in the Soviet Union was all in spite of sanctions and wars that handicapped the Soviet economy. The US sabotaged the country and worked to portray communism as this ultimate evil. Sanctions on the Soviet Union go as far back as 1948. Sanctions on the Soviet Union hampered the country ever since sanctions began in 1948. This greatly hindered the Union and many of its allies. It is known today that the Reagan administration and the CIA deliberately led a sophisticated sabotage of the Soviet Union that eventually led to the dissolution in 1991. Reagan's own officials credited the sanctions and the actions taken by the administration as a significant reason for the disintegration of the Union. The US government actively worked to disrupt the Soviet economy. They drove oil prices down in hopes of minimizing the nation's biggest export, and they engaged in arms races deliberately to divert funds away from things like education and healthcare. It is also no secret that the US as a culture has sponsored anti-communist sentiments that still remain today. Russians are seen as villains in movies, and propaganda proliferated in many aspects of American life back in the Cold War and even still today. Hell, there's this episode of a Disney Channel show which is made to discredit communism.
You know, I graded your recent exams. Mr. Fryer, 100%. You get an A. Mr. Babineau, 100%. You get an A. Ms. Hart, Ms. Matthews, Farkle, 100%. You get a C.
What? We get a what's that you say now? How do we get 100% and get a C?
Because when you get everything right, but you don't do it yourselves, it makes you average. A divided by 3 is a C.
That's not how communism works. Today, the US still fights against socialist efforts all over the globe, even resorting to military coups in many nations. It is clear that there is a vested interest to stop socialism almost at all costs. And of course there is. Large corporations are threatened by the existence of socialism. and these corporations fill the pockets of our politicians. Despite everything the West did to discredit the Soviet Union, leftist ideas are becoming more popular. Things like universal healthcare and universal education are gaining more traction in America due to successful implementations in other countries. So while the Soviet Union did not succeed, it led the way for an alternative to capitalism. We can now learn from what the USSR did right and what they did wrong and use it as a case study to see what the socioeconomic results are of a centrally planned economy. We now have an opportunity to move past these anti-communist biases and recognize the sabotage committed by the United States during the Cold War and the undemocratic intervention that still occurs today. Now we just need to figure out how to get more socialists elected. That part's a little bit harder. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope that you liked it. It's a little bit more controversial, but I put a lot of research and a lot of work into it, so I hope that you enjoyed it. Of course, leave a comment, leave a like, and subscribe if you want to do any of those things, and if you're looking forward to more of my content, it really helps. And if you have any suggestions for future video ideas, I would love to hear them. I think the next one, I already have a video picked out that I want to respond to. But if there's anything within the world of politics that you think that I should be talking about, then of course, let me know. Thank you all, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.